Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. Erik Skopil, Matt Prehm here. Really strange introduction. The site glitched on us while we're going, so it's
A
gonna be a great intro. Technology.
glitchy system to start. How about that? How fun.
Yes, how fun. Uh, Wrapping up interviews for Oregon football's sixth spring practice of the year on April 8th. Um, Again, we were not in the building or in Autzen Stadium where they practiced today. We're not allowed all spring because of construction. But nonetheless, we did get interviews with head coach Dan Lanning. We also got to speak for the first time with new wide receiver coach Ross Douglas. That was a highly interesting and informative interview that went about 7 or 8 minutes. And then we also got time with receiver and senior Gary Bryant Jr. and redshirt sophomore quarterback Austin Novosad. It was an offensive feel to the day. But let's start with Gary. I think this is a guy that could have a role for Oregon this coming fall. Could be asked to greatly expand what he does, and he missed basically all of last year. He got in at the tail end in like a limited reserve role, and today we learned why that was, and it was an interesting backstory from an injury perspective. Erik, why don't you fill us in or the listener in on what prevented it, and we can then go kind of his take on the offense and his upcoming final season of football.
Yeah, well, I think to start, Gary is still with the program, and that is different from. I just think back to past years where there's been a player who was involved in the offense or the defense the year before. They're with the team, and then they hit the portal afterwards because they didn't end up really playing. I think of like Chris Hudson or Byron Cardwell as being two players that I can think of in the Lanning era in 2022 and 23, where it was like, oh, we thought these guys were going to be involved in the offense. There wasn't seemingly like a reason they weren't, other than like, hey, ultimately maybe they weren't good fits here and they ended up transferring. I think there was a part of the fan base that felt that way was the case with Gary. I think we had kind of hypothesized at times last year of like, this was their third leading receiver in 2023. Why is he not even a part of anything? And it was so touch and go. And he helped clarify that it was a pretty significant injury he was dealing with that he suffered last fall camp. Was not expected to be a 3-month recovery like it was, something he had anticipated would maybe keep him out early. And if you remember, there were times where it seemed like he was ramping up towards it.
Yes.
Kind of got slowed back down. That was some of the confusion. It's like Dan would say, hey, we think Gary is getting closer, kind of an optimistic tone, and then you just wouldn't see him. Then he wouldn't be practicing. And it was like, okay. And so he feels like he is as close to 100% as he's been since he's been here. And I think it was Dan who today said, this is the best we've seen Gary Bryant in Oregon colors in practice. Like, I think that's significant. And
really good
yeah, really good news. And I think from what we heard from players and Dan today, like it sounds like this is a player they're relying on and should not be seen as an afterthought player. Like he was kind of a player that for me, when I was putting together our predicted two deeps, was kind of hard to place because are you looking at the 2023 player who was, your second or third option at receiver at times. I mean, your third or fourth maybe at other times, but like there were games I can think of where he was really impactful. Or are you talking about a guy who's just not going to have a role like he did last year? And so now that we have more clarity, I think you kind of get a better sense of kind of what last year was for him and what makes this year potentially such a potential breakout season or reemergent season for him. I guess not a breakout because he's already been a good player, but I think you should be optimistic about Gary Bryant. And I think the conversation about that receiving room, I don't think it starts with him. I think Evan Stewart, Decorian Moore, clearly more talented players, but Gary's a veteran guy who's been around. And I just think today helped kind of reaffirm this is a name to know in that pass offense. And considering all they lost, potentially a pretty significant one.
Yeah, this was, think back to 2023, and he was by far their best perimeter blocker at the receiver position. Mm-hmm. And that was a primary reason why I felt like he started a lot of the games. And I think they took a step back last season in their perimeter blocking without him on the field. It wasn't as consistent. And obviously when you're a receiver, like the first thing you don't want to talk about is, oh, this is a great blocker and whatnot. You want to talk about the the playmaking ability that guy has and the deep threat he can be. And he talked about that. Like he said, his focus, I think you asked him, was, I want to be a more consistent and better deep threat, long, stride receiver. And then he also said, and then, the best thing for any player is availability is, for your talent and staying healthy throughout the entire season. So I think this was a positive development, a step in the right direction. It gives a room that's got a ton of eyeballs on it because they have to replace Tez. They have to replace Trayshawn Holden. Evan Stewart's back, a guy that's considered by some first round fringe draft pick caliber, first day, second day type guy at that position group. And then after Evan, Justice Lowe and Kyler Casper and Jurion Dickey and Jeremiah McClellan. And then you get to some true freshmen, Corey Moore and Cooper and Perry. And then you added a Malik Benson in the portal. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of new faces, of guys that are going to be taking bigger roles. And to have a second vet in this system for at least another season is going to be, I think, a pretty big deal for this offense. And to be honest, Eric, like my entire outlook of Gary changed because I felt like even after spring ball, like if we didn't talk to Gary, you kind of in the back of your head kind of had him as pegged as is this maybe a spring portal guy? Like, is he going to have a role? Is he going to have a piece? And sometimes you just have to hear a guy talk about his role within a program and his feelings on the school he's at to know, like, yeah, that guy's not leaving unless he's told he has to leave. And I don't think those two things would also happen.
Yeah, and I think the most interesting thing that Gary talked about today was actually kind of goes into this because you're talking about kind of his longevity here. And Dan kind of pointed him out as one of the leaders on this offense and acknowledged the fact that on Saturday he had kind of stepped up into a leadership role and addressed the team. And Dan didn't say what the circumstances were. And so Gary was asked later, kind of what was that about? And I thought this was, and again, we're not watching practice. And so maybe I don't want to say overvaluing certain pieces of information, but when we hear anything kind of related to what's happening on the practice field, my ears can't help but perk up. But why did Gary address the team? He addressed the team because the offense had a really bad day on Saturday, it sounded like, and he didn't think it lived up to the standard. And he felt like somebody in that room, and he probably was looking around going like, who else has been around here very long? I'm kind of the most veteran guy here, strangely, especially at the skill positions. And he felt like it was his moment to say, hey, this is not going to cut it. We have much higher, aspirations and expectations for this program. What we did today, and these are his words, basically, what we did today isn't going to meet what we're trying to achieve here. And so, great that you have a veteran like Gary Bryant in the room who can address the team and kind of say that. B, notable that it's a senior receiver and not one of the quarterbacks who pulls everybody aside. I guess that makes sense when it's in a competition. And then C, also speaks to the fact, and again, we don't have eyes, ears, much of anything on these practices, but sort of speaks to maybe some of the dynamics from these practices. At least on a Saturday, the offense was having a hard time and the defense was making some plays. So don't want to make too much out of it. We'll see. We'll have a much better feel, I guess, of the spring game of kind of like how some of this is going to work, what it looks like. But I remember our first podcast of spring here of pointing out there's a lot of youth on this offense, starting at the quarterback position, but certainly not exclusive there. I mean, at all sorts of positions, there's a lot of young guys that are going to be relied on. And maybe there is something to it of like, yeah, there's going to be some growing pains, and you'd much rather have growing pains in early April than in early September. And so getting some of that and having a leader step forward and say, hey guys, we need to be better than this, I think is a real positive thing, but also like can kind of present that, yeah, this isn't going to be a perfect transition from Dylan Gabriel, veteran quarterback, to Dante Moore. And it's not just the quarterbacks, a lot of youth around him. It's not going to be as simple as, hey, we're going to be this offense still with a bunch of different personnel.
And to that point of leadership, Dan did share today one of the few things we got from him that was pretty notable. There wasn't much. There's some big picture stories that people are asking questions on, but one kind of immediate thing that we did get was he informed us that Matthew Bedford is out there. He is participating. It sounds like he's closer to being fully healthy and ready to go for every day than he is being limited most days. I don't remember Lanning coming out saying, did he ever say like he's all the way back? I don't think he.
No, Zach asked the question. It was because a couple of days ago, Elijah Rushing posted, because this is how we're trying to report on practice, is that Elijah Rushing posted to social media like highlights, and Matthew Bedford was in full pads going through it as the right guard. So I think that's kind of what we know, is he's at least doing full contact drills and playing that position.
Yeah. But Lanning did say that he's out there, he is doing work, and he cited the importance of having the leadership qualities of a senior, a guy that's going to be like his sixth or seventh season of college football, multi-year starter at Indiana before he came to Oregon, was supposed to be the starting right guard for Oregon this season, or I guess this past season before he got hurt in fall camp. And then it got hurt again later on in the year. Notable that Lanning cited that, Bedford teaches or has the skill set that you can't teach in the sport of football, and that's size. He said his size is impactful. And then more notable is he came out and said, like, we're a better football team when he's out on the football field and healthy to be able to play for us. And he is. I just thought that was a small anecdote to note, and an important one for an offensive line that's also reloading.
And has a ton of questions, because while you could have said, hey, it's probably the three transfers, Poncho, and then either Dave or Matt at one of the guard spots based upon expectations, again, scrubbing through a 5-second video clip after a practice is probably not the best practice for addressing this, but it was pretty clear that the right tackle in that picture was not Alex Harkey, who a lot of us thought it would be. And if everybody working in that group were kind of the quote unquote top guys, seems like Janoris Wilson might be their right tackle at the moment. So like there's, we're kind of unpacking all of these things, but certainly having Bedford available there makes some clarity at guard, because I had kind of, hypothesized, like, if he's not available for most of spring, like, how do you feel about him being your right guard ultimately? Is that give time for either a Dave Iuli or Kavika Rogers, one of those guys who's a little bit less experienced, a little more green, to maybe make some progress there? I think Bedford being available, like if I were to do an updated depth chart, like I would probably just put him at the top and put Dave and Kavika behind him at this point, based upon the kind of player we know he can be. So offensive line continues to be a position where there's a lot of questions, and I think the clarity we're getting maybe adds more, but at the end of the day, you have to feel good about, like, they have seemingly most of their key players available. And for a line that is going to look a lot different come fall, it's really important, because we hear every offseason about cross-training, getting guys moved to different places, finding different combinations. We saw that happen in season last year. It wasn't pretty. Getting some of that felt and kind of worked on, I guess, done in April, similar to what I was saying earlier about the growing pains for just the offense as a whole. But I think on the offensive line, certainly you'd like to hear that all the kind of main cast of characters are at least present, available, and taking part. You're on mute, Matt.
Sorry. We did speak with Ross Douglas, Oregon's new receivers coach. I was pretty impressed walking away. And look, like, that's pretty easy to do in press conferences, new coaches, but very confident guy. Very also, like, aware of the steps he's come and the places he's been and the people that he's worked around and the impacts that those people had. I think a paraphrasing the quote here is, he was asked about, like, what did you know about Oregon? Did you have any connections? And he said that, he played for Oregon co-OC tight end coach Drew Maringer when he coached at Rutgers. That is where Ross Douglas played football. And then he had a previous relationship with Oregon's current running back coach, Rashad Samples. And so that helps. He said he had 2 connects to the program, but did not know Dan Lanning, did not have much interaction previously with Dan Lanning. And he acknowledged, like, Fran Brown at Syracuse helped him a ton. Being in the Patriot way helped him a ton. And said, like, Dan Lanning took a risk. He knows, like he's got confidence in me, and it's my job, and I'm going to prove him right. And like that quote to me was just like, that's what you want to hear from like a up and coming rising guy. Like he is extremely confident. He knows knows where, like, hey, I need to work with these more experienced guys or what have you. And I don't know. I just walked away with that feeling like very impressed. A different demeanor, I think, than Junior for sure. Like Junior was very reserved, very laid back. He was quick to point out like we accomplished this, and this at Syracuse, and we had guys that were highly successful at previous schools, and we were also highly successful with some guys that were castaways from their previous schools, and he cited them off, and he knew all their stats. Like this is a very confident guy and I feel like just hearing him talk for 6 or 7, 8 minutes, like I bet you the receiver room kind of gets along with him really well too. Kind of the connection player to coach is probably pretty strong.
Yeah, talk about confidence. How about this quote? I got the interview, and once I got the interview, I knew nobody was going to beat me out for the job. Like that's the type of mentality you hear from athletes all the time. Makes sense. This is a 30-year-old position coach, right? Like wasn't too long ago this guy was playing, and probably if things had gone a little differently for his athletic career, he might still he'd probably still be trying to play to a certain degree, right? So like I liked that. I agree, Matt. Like I came away feeling like this guy's very self-assured. Does he have the same CV, career CV of a Junior Adams in terms of all the development and all the stops he's been? No, but this is a 30-year-old guy who I think you could see, whether it be 3 to 4 years down the road, hopefully he's still at Oregon, be somebody who you're talking about in similar kind of discussion points of what he's been able to achieve of a Junior Adams. And he certainly has. I mean, Junior helped him in terms of setting it up with bringing in a Jacorian Moore this cycle. If people forget, Gatlin Bear will be enrolling in 2026. That's a 5-star. Junior also recruited Jurion Dickey, who I don't know what to make of, but that's a former 5-star. But like the point is the cupboard's not bare. And now we see what Ross Douglas can do with all of this. And yeah, Matt, he kind of likened it to his time at Syracuse where, he ran through, we had this guy, we had that guy. These guys had 1,000-yard seasons, but in their career previously, they'd had like 130 yards or 270 yards of all-purpose production. So he feels like this group, which again, different in that most of these guys are like former 5-star recruits or big-time prospects, but really none of them have had the kind of career success that like a Tez Johnson had or a Troy Franklin the year previous, right? So like we think Evan can be an alpha. He talked about it a little bit. Ross did today about like what he can develop into. We think DeCorian has that talent. Gary Bryant's been around. We mentioned him a lot earlier. We talked about him. He's been around for a while. Like there are players who have experience, but none of these guys have like the all Big Ten accolades, as he said, and it's his job to create a room that can get there. So we will see what the next 6 months look like for this receiving room. I think it's a really important position group to make some assessments on, considering all the kind of newness and lack of carryover from last year. I mean, a new position coach, basically a totally different group of, kind of main characters. I think you have to feel good about where Ross is, but this is going to be something we're checking in on probably, the first couple of weeks of the season is like, how does this receiving room look? Because it's so pivotal for this offense to have good quality play at this position, especially when you're bringing in, and you're going to have some growing pains with that quarterback position. Like, I just think this hire has to hit, and I came away really encouraged by today, but there's going to have to be a bigger sample size until we kind of have a sense of what this looks like. But this is certainly a guy who checks all the boxes, and from a demeanor perspective, carries himself with probably just about as much confidence of any like Oregon assistant coach I can think of, maybe since like Kenny Dillingham, who was always very self-assured.
Yes. I liked his answer about the recruiting. Now that you've got the O on your chest, does that give you more confidence? And he was like, yeah, it's going to help, but no, like, I know my skill set from a recruiter, and I know I'll be successful. Is it going to help? Absolutely. But it's not something that I, absolutely needed to be a talent evaluator that was successful, which I like that answer.
I just had one other thing here that kind of dawned on me, in part because we spoke for like 15 minutes with Drew Maringer the other day. and this is kind of just an aside, but this guy's career has been really interesting. Like not only was he coaching Ross at Rutgers in 2016, he was the offensive coordinator as a 29-year-old at Rutgers. And again, no one's saying Rutgers is Oregon, but Rutgers is in the same conference, right? Yeah. Like this is a big school. And it's just interesting to kind of think back to what Drew would have been considered to be a decade ago and kind of what he's developed into the same lens of Ross, who are similar ages, kind of ascending coaches, getting opportunities at big schools. So I'm sure there's a certain level for Mehringer of like, it's really cool that I helped coach this player. And now that he's somebody that I can help give an opportunity, maybe open the door at a school like Oregon. But a lot of these guys on staff have had similar career trajectories where like they're getting big opportunities, late 20s, early 30s. And Ross is definitely one of those. But I just think, thinking more about Drew, he kind of fits that same mold in terms of his career trajectory. And clearly this is the kind of guy that Dan really likes to spend. He likes to have a room with a bunch of guys who are kind of like-minded and had similar careers, I guess.
100%. Very interesting interviews. That's all I had on the docket. You got anything left to throw in here?
Over the weekend, we talked to Kenyon Sadiq and Drew Mehringer, and there's a bunch of stuff up on the site. That's kind of old news at this point, but simply put, Kenyon looks incredible in terms of the body type, just seeing him in person, and it sounds like he's had a great offseason, and you have to feel really good about what he can be in that room. And Drew certainly spent a lot of time talking about Kenyon and the kind of player he could be in that room. So that's content from a couple of days ago, so I don't want to go through all of it again, but you can certainly go pull that up over on Duck Territory. We have a bunch of stories on the tight end room over the weekend because that was who we spoke to on Saturday.
Sounds like we'll speak with Tony Tuioti on Thursday, as well as potentially another quarterback in the room. And then we'll probably dive into some QB talk on the next podcast after being able to speak with multiple guys there. But until the next one, thank you for listening. You've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.